These days, it can be hard to trust the media. What's true, what's fake, and who is behind the message? I'm a freelance journalist and videographer who has spent years studying the media. Now I'm taking a look at what local, regional, and national news stories mean to us here in North Central Washington. I'm Dominick Bonny, and this is Common Sense. These days, there's a lot of social pressure to avoid the subject of politics. It's too divisive, some say. It's not polite to talk about politics, some say. And some simply say, I'm just not a political person. I understand why right now, especially, folks would want to avoid politics altogether. But I say that now, in the wake of one of the most divisive elections in American history, in the shadow of an insurrection that shattered our 243-year record of peaceful transfers of power, now is the most important time to pay attention to politics. Because regardless of who you are and how you feel about the insurrection on January 6th, the fact is that no matter where you live, politics dictate everything about your daily life. From the clothes on your back to the food you put in your mouth, to what and how fast you drive, to who you can marry, and what you can do on the property that you own. It doesn't matter if you have a say in the political process that regulates the clothes factory or the auto manufacturing plant or marriage or property. The political system still controls those things. In the United States of America, our founders intended that we, the people, should have control through elected representatives over the system that governs this nation. Ours is a system born in opposition to monarchy and autocracy. The phrase, no taxation without representation, was one of the most important political rallying cries leading up to the American Revolution. It wasn't, don't tread on me. The revolution itself was conceived in taverns and coffee shops. The phrase, as American as apple pie, should be as American as grumbling about politics over coffee. The ideas that formed the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution were hashed out and debated by people who wanted to take a more active role in their own government. They wanted it so badly and knew how important it was to have a say in the political system that governed them that they fought and won a war of independence against one of the two most powerful countries on the planet at the time, the British Empire. That's the legacy the revolutionary generation left for us. So I always have to shake my head in wonder and disappointment when I hear somebody say, oh, I'm just not that political, or it's too divisive or impolite to talk about politics. I wonder what General Washington and his army who marched out of Valley Forge leaving bloody footprints in the snow would have to say to those among us who say, oh gosh, politics, that's just not for me. The saying goes, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world he doesn't exist. But I think they should change it to, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people that politics don't matter in their daily lives. Stay tuned after the break because in this special episode of Common Sense, I'm going to deviate from my normal format and lay down a point-by-point argument for why politics matter, even if they drive us half crazy. I'm Dominick Bonny, and this is Common Sense.
Are you ready to freshen up your home? Boswell's expansive two-story showroom is filled with high-quality furniture that's always discounted to give you their best price every day. Boswell's is receiving new furniture deliveries each week, so you'll be sure to find just what you need for your home without the wait. Complimentary design assistance and free local delivery. Superior customer service and the best value for your money. Start at Boswell's on Easy Street. It's closer than you think.
Hello and welcome back. Another thing that sticks in my craw about folks saying they don't care about politics or that they're just not that political is so often these cliches betray one's privilege. And that's point one, the privilege of not caring about politics. When I hear somebody say, I just don't care about politics, what I hear is, I have never had to think about politics because they don't affect me. I am not affected by a minimum wage, so I have never had to think about whether $15 an hour at 40 hours a week can pay for a family of 4 to eat healthy food, cover rent or mortgage, a car payment, and health and life insurance, let alone ballet lessons or a reading tutor or a few extra Christmas presents. When I hear somebody say, I don't care about politics, what I hear is, I don't care about the policies that have separated little children from their mothers at our southern border. What I hear is, I don't care about the quality of public education our children get, or the integrity of the bridges we drive over, or the amount of lead in the water we drink. You might think you're privileged enough to not care about politics, but unless you are a billionaire with access to natural aquifers bubbling with fresh, pure water and a food supply chain unsullied by factories, machines, and the hands of immigrants that so many people want to keep out of this country, you too should talk and care about politics. If you are like me, not a billionaire, you should care about politics very much. But how can we understand politics without first understanding ourselves? And what can we do without understanding our own history? That's where the big lie comes in. The big lie. George Orwell wrote that the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. Now, I think he was referring to what the British were doing to the Indian people, but it applies to so many situations. As Americans, most of us were raised on a version of our own history that some would describe as fan fiction. Manifest destiny was just that, inevitable and not something to question too much. I certainly wasn't taught that the United States westward expansion included genocide. At least that wasn't in the headline or even the main points. It was more of a footnote. I was taught that the Civil War was not about slavery, but rather states' rights. In fact, I was taught that most slaves were perfectly happy and well taken care of by their masters. Sure, there were a few bad apples who treated their slaves cruelly, but they were a minority. Those are just some of the things I was taught in high school history class, and maybe you were too. And this is one of the most insidious ways we indoctrinate young minds into not questioning our history and the actions of our forebears. In fact, the idea that we should not question the decisions of previous generations is nonsense. Every generation makes mistakes, and every leader makes mistakes. It's only by being honest and examining those mistakes that we can avoid making the same mistakes in the future. Although the quote is commonly attributed to Edmund Burke, it's actually the Spanish philosopher George Santayana who said, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." If we are unable or unwilling to take a frank and honest look at our own history, it won't matter how politically active and involved we are. Without a good understanding of our own history, we are like a ship without any instruments, not knowing what direction we came from and what direction we're headed. Without understanding our own history in context, we are lost at sea and will surely perish. And that brings me to point number 3, the tolerance of intolerance. In 1945, right on the heels of World War II, Polish philosopher Karl Popper published a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. Those who survived the war were faced with the same questions that we are currently find ourselves asking. After the insurrection on January 6th, how far should our tolerance of misinformation, lies, and violent rhetoric go? Clearly, in the 20s and 30s, allowing Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, Stalin, and other authoritarian strongmen to present their lies as truth played a large part in tearing Europe and most of the world apart. Those lies led to the most destructive war in human history. So as the world was picking up the pieces, Popper asked the question, how much intolerance can a tolerant society tolerate? It's called the paradox of tolerance, and here's how he summed it up. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be most unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal. In the same way, we should consider incitement to murder or kidnapping or the revival of the slave trade as criminal. Now, I have seen in the wake of Amazon and other companies refusing to provide web hosting services to right-wing social media platforms like Parler, people decrying censorship, claiming that their First Amendment rights have been violated. First of all, this is not true. If the free market decides that your speech is too dangerous to be allowed to circulate unchecked, that is not censorship. That's capitalism in action. It's a business decision. The First Amendment is not a guarantee of a microphone or a social media platform, and it's definitely not a guarantee that you will never face the consequences of your speech. If you are not able to access your social media platform of choice, that is not a constitutional issue. You can still go out on the street corner and voice your opinion. You are not being deprived of the freedom of speech. You have merely been deprived of your platform of choice by a private company. Furthermore, Popper says eloquently, and I will reiterate less eloquently, that we should treat the preaching of intolerance as if it is outside the law and consider incitement of intolerance and persecution as criminal. Long before January 6th, the winds of right-wing radicalism were blowing. And so too was the incitement of intolerance and persecution. At the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, the nation watched as young men with tiki torches marched and chanted, "The Jews will not replace us." During that day of demonstrations and protests, a right-wing extremist plowed his car into a crowd of people, killing a woman named Heather Heyer and injuring a dozen more. Then President Trump addressed the unrest, condemning it as an egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides, as if protesting white nationalism and running somebody over for protesting white nationalism are practically the same thing. Last summer, we saw right-wing militias taking to the streets of mid-sized cities and even small towns like ours to intimidate BLM protesters. They claimed they were there to protect from Antifa terrorists that never materialized. I covered this myself in the first episode of this show and wrote about it in the Wenatchee World and on my own blog. In the fall, then President Trump was asked during a presidential debate by moderator Chris Wallace to clearly denounce white supremacy and right-wing extremist groups that had been agitating all year and looked poised to disrupt the voting process. The only rebuke that Trump could muster was, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." It wasn't, "Stop doing that." It wasn't, "Do not threaten or harm your fellow Americans." It was, "Stand back and stand by." Let's take a look at that clip.
Have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you prepared to specifically do it? Well,
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white supremacists
and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
In his book on tyranny, this book, historian Timothy Snyder dedicates a chapter to paramilitaries. Chapter 6 is titled, "Be Wary of Paramilitaries," and in it he writes, "When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of the leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and official police and military intermingle, the end has come. In the few weeks since the insurrection, we have seen that many police officers, an alarming number of which came from Seattle, participated in violent sedition. Thankfully, our civilian and military leadership were able to investigate and expel dangerous extremists in the ranks of the DC and Capitol Police, as well as the National Guard, before the inauguration on January 20th. But it speaks to the hold that lies and misinformation have on too many Americans. And that brings me to my fourth point, which is do not trust anyone who claims to have a monopoly on truth. Join us after the break as we examine this further.
You love to help others. You need a solid career. You can have it all with help from Charter College. Our 10-month medical assistant program prepares you to work in healthcare settings like physician offices, rehab centers, and clinics. You'll learn to take patient vitals, assist with exams, administer injections, and maintain medical records. When you're ready to launch a rewarding healthcare career, visit chartercollege.edu because we work to get you to work.
Merry Maids of Wenatchee has been professionally cleaning and sanitizing homes and businesses in North Central Washington since 1998. Merry Maids uses commercial-grade cleaners and viricides. Merry Maids has implemented additional safety and sanitation protocols. They are strictly following CDC guidelines for the safety of their clients and employees. For expert help with cleaning and sanitizing your home or business, call or look up Merry Maids of Wenatchee to schedule your free estimate today.
We should be aware of anyone who claims to have sole ownership of the truth, and we should beware of those who dismiss or diminish the truth. Again, I'll quote Timothy Snyder, who wrote very recently, "Post-truth is pre-fascism, and Trump has been our post-truth president. Without agreement on some basic facts, citizens cannot form the civil society that would allow them to defend themselves." Like historical fascist leaders, Trump has presented himself as the single source of truth. His use of the term fake news echoed the Nazi smear Lügenpresse, or lying press. Like the Nazis, he referred to reporters as enemies of the people. Trump lied at a pace perhaps unmatched by any leader in history. To believe in all of them was to accept the authority of a single man, because to believe in all of them was to disbelieve everything else. Now, there has been a lot of talk about unity, mostly as a way to deflect from discussions about accountability in the wake of the January 6th insurrection. But how can there be any unity without truth? Without a shared set of facts that we all acknowledge and agree upon, is unity even possible? I don't think that we understand how close we've come to the brink since Trump lost the 2020 presidential election and refused to acknowledge that fact. And without a true accounting for what happened and who is responsible, I fear we could find ourselves back on the brink of chaos again soon. But back to the idea of unity briefly, and how that concept is being used as a bad faith smokescreen to distract from the more important issues at hand. First of all, unity is not the goal of the American experiment. And if people say that it is, they are either tragically naive or trying to push a bad faith argument on you. Lee Druckmann, a professor of political science at Northwestern University, summed it up well recently when he wrote, "The goal of democracy is not unity. The goal of democracy is productive disagreement and conflict management through legitimate representative government." Now, how can we have a productive disagreement when some of us refuse to acknowledge objective truth? How can we have conflict management when a faction of willfully misinformed extremists refuse to acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election? Setting our sights on the absurdly vague goal of unity is a distraction. Besides, what is unity? Does it mean no disagreement? That doesn't sound very democratic. Or does unity mean not holding anyone accountable for their action? If that's the case, I don't think the unity argument would hold up in any court in America. Please, Your Honor, don't hold me accountable for domestic violence. That would disrupt the unity of my family. Does anyone really think that argument would hold up in any local court? Of course not. Then why would it hold up in Congress? If we refuse to hold Donald Trump accountable, aren't we just condoning similar terrible behavior from presidents in the future, regardless of their party? But if you cannot look beyond your loyalty to our most recent president and admit that he had a role to play in all of this, if you feel personally offended by criticisms of Donald Trump either during the insurrection or in its aftermath, I would refer you to the words of one of our most charismatic and powerful and effective presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy said, "To announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but it is morally treasonable to the American public." Unpatriotic and servile. Those are Teddy Roosevelt's words, not mine. Now, for those of you who ask, well, Dom, will you criticize Joe Biden now that he's president? The answer is yes. In fact, I have criticized Joe Biden already on this show. And before I had a show on NCWLIFE, I criticized him on social media. I also criticized Barack Obama when he was president. Being critical of our leaders is American. And if anyone pretends otherwise, be wary. But what is also American is holding people accountable for their actions. And that leads me to my fifth point, the consequences of lies. First of all, are there any? At this point, I honestly don't know. It's not clear. What is clear is that lies and misinformation have gotten Americans killed. But it's not clear if the lies and misinformation that got Americans killed will result in any real repercussions. During the second impeachment of Donald Trump, only 10 House Republicans could muster the political courage to join their Democratic colleagues in rebuking Trump for setting a mob of insurrectionists against an entire branch of our government. One of those 10 was Representative Dan Newhouse from my hometown of Sunnyside. And he has been taking a lot of political heat since he cast that vote. Let's take a look at his remarks on the House floor where he explains his decision.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Madam Speaker, this is a sad day in our republic, but not as sad or disheartening as the violence we witnessed in the Capitol last Wednesday. We are all responsible. My colleagues are responsible for not condemning rioters this past year like those who barricaded the doors of the Seattle Police Department and attempted to murder the officers inside. Others, including myself, are responsible for not speaking out sooner, before the president misinformed and inflamed a violent mob who tore down the American flag and brutally beat Capitol Police officers. Madam Speaker, we must all do better. These articles of impeachment are flawed, but I will not use process as an excuse. There is no excuse for President Trump's actions. The president took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week, there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it. That is why, with a heavy heart and clear resolve, I will vote yes on these articles of impeachment.
He's right. We must do better, all of us. And he brings up a point worth addressing, other than his condemnation of Trump's actions. Like Newhouse, many on the right have brought up Black Lives Matter protesters and tried to draw a line between them and those who breached the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th. It's a tedious red herring that is beneath a response by anyone with a functioning brain, but I would like to point out a few differences between the Capitol insurrectionists and Antifa agitators in the Pacific Northwest. First of all, a park and a police precinct in Seattle, Washington are not the same thing as the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Not only are they on opposite sides of the North American continent, one is the seat of American government and the other is a park and a police station. A police station should be respected, but if you're more concerned about a police precinct being disrespected than the U.S. Capitol, that speaks volumes. Furthermore, if these Antifa monsters tried to kill Seattle PD officers, as Newhouse said, they didn't try very hard because they didn't succeed, unlike the insurrectionists who breached our Capitol building and beat Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick to death with a fire hydrant. 2 other officers took their own lives in the wake of that insurrection. I have not read or heard about any Seattle PD officers who took their own lives because of Chaz or CHOP. Whataboutism and bad faith arguments aside, I want to go on record here and condemn the actions of anarchists and anyone who would seek to undermine civil order. And that goes for the gaggle of losers and anarchists who burned an American flag and destroyed property on January 20th in Seattle. No one I know on the left claims these people as their own, and no true American, left or right, should be able to stomach watching the symbol of our nation burn, whether it be in Tehran or Seattle or Washington, D.C. But back to Newhouse. 6 Washington State Republican chairs condemned his action, and Republicans across the state have been calling for him to resign, which shows the battle that is happening inside that party right now. And we should all care about that, even if we are not card-carrying Republicans. Why? Because if the MAGA wing of the GOP wins and continues to control the party and its policies, that's bad for everyone. It means there will be no end to the lies and misinformation. It will stop being the grand old party and fully transition into the party of QAnon nonsense, and maybe it already has. Recently, the Yamhill, Oregon native and New York Times columnist Nick Kristof wrote an opinion piece titled "An Open Letter to My Conservative Friends," and in it he writes, quote, "You've been hoodwinked, exploited, and manipulated by con artists waving flags, casting lies, and monetizing bigotry. Steve Bannon, who suggested beheading Dr. Anthony Fauci, defrauded Trump supporters into donating to build a border wall and then used some of the money himself, according to a federal indictment. Here on our family farm, we received a direct mail appeal warning about Islam in Yamhill schools and pleading for donations to protect Christianity. No, that isn't about conservative values, but about spreading hate and hysteria while grabbing at your wallet. So let's give America a chance to heal. And as I told my worried friends, don't hesitate to stand up for your conservative values. We need Republicans. America benefits from a loyal opposition. I couldn't have said it better myself. And we have seen the same thing in our own state with Lauren Culp. He clearly lost the race for governor in a landslide, yet refused to concede and kept taking people's money to pursue a bunk lawsuit until he faced legal consequences for his lies and misinformation. The consequences of his lies have led to the highest Republican office holder in the state, Kim Wyman, to wonder aloud whether the Republican Party still has room for her in it. In an interview with a Washington State NPR affiliate, she said, quote, "I think every Republican elected official right now in the country is really having to do some soul searching about why they are Republican and what it means to them and why they are a part of that party. I know I have been doing that," she said. The article goes on to say that Wyman sees a direct link between lies about the election results and the violence that occurred in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. It's leading her to rethink her party membership. The article ends with this quote from Wyman in which she says, quote, "If that's what my party stands for now, I don't know that I can continue being a Republican because that's not what Republicanism is about," end quote. When you have people like Lauren Culp gaining ground in your party and people like Kim Wyman looking for the exits, your party is in bad shape if it ever wants to be taken seriously again. And the grown-ups better take back control of their party fast because right-wing extremism has become a domestic terror issue. For instance, a man in Northern California was recently arrested with pipe bombs in a plan to kill California Governor Gavin Newsom. According to the Sacramento Bee, the man named Ian Benjamin Rogers was charged with unlawful possession of an unregistered destructive device after investigators found 5 pipe bombs inside a gun safe in his business in Napa County. Text messages on Rogers' phone indicates he believed Donald Trump won the 2020 election and that he planned to go to war and attack Democrats to ensure Trump remained in office, FBI Special Agent Stephanie Miner wrote in an affidavit. And this is not an isolated case. Remember the MAGA bomber? From October 22nd to November 1st, 2018, he mailed 16 packages found to contain pipe bombs via the U.S. Postal Service to several Democratic Party politicians and other prominent critics of then-President Donald Trump. It's an all too common theme. Conservatives being radicalized by conspiracy theories and lies, who then turn to often premeditated violence, meaning they prepare and plan attacks prior to carrying them out. The saving grace so far has been their ineptitude, but we cannot count on that forever. But it's not totally Donald Trump's fault. Sure, he supplied a lion's share of the lies, conspiracy theories, and misinformation that has held so many folks on the right in thrall for years now. But it is the right-wing media ecosystem that amplifies and repeats those lies 24/7 on channels like Fox News, One American News Network, and Newsmax. I am reminded of the great journalist and broadcaster Edward R. Murrow, who almost single-handedly brought down Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1952 through the use of reason and inquisition. McCarthy had become the most visible public face of a period in the United States in which Cold War tensions fueled fears of widespread communist subversion. He is known for alleging that numerous communists and Soviet spies and sympathizers had infiltrated the United States federal government, universities, film industry, and elsewhere. Ultimately, the smear tactics that he used led him to be censored by the U.S. Senate. The term McCarthyism, coined in 1950 in reference to his practices, was soon applied to similar anti-communist activities. Today, the term is used more broadly to mean demagogic, reckless, and unsubstantiated accusations, as well as public attacks on the character or patriotism of political opponents. Sound familiar? Well, what seems so commonplace to us today appalled many thinking Americans in the 1950s, and Murrow covered McCarthy in his show called See It Now. At the end of that famous broadcast, in which he used McCarthy's own words to show how un-American and foolish he was, Murrow concluded with these thoughts that contained more sorrow than anger. He said, "We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusations are not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear of one another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who fear to speak, to write, to associate, and defend causes that were for the moment unpopular. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay among our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." So now it's up to us to decide if we're going to be held captive by misinformation, cynicism, and charlatans, or honor our forebears and find a way to heal this great nation and fix our politics. Only time will tell. Join me next time for Common Sense.